I'm Thiago Passos for SSW TV. I'm here at NDC Sydney with Michele Bustamante. She's a Regional Director and Azure MVP, also a Docker Captain. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
It's awesome
great.
to have you here. So let's start with the whole Docker and container story. So you're doing two talks here at NDC, one for .NET developers using Docker and the whole orchestration story. So can you tell us a little bit of the Docker and the container story to start with?
Well, so maybe just to take from the talks, sort of my logic here is, on the one hand, we have Docker as a tool that enables microservices and makes it easier for you to manage your development lifecycle and DevOps lifecycle, and positions you, if you will, right, for a microservices solution as one piece of the puzzle. And then you've got, where do I deploy that, which sometimes might involve orchestration, and orchestration platforms are many. And of course, then there's a question of, do I really need one? So I'm trying to cover in the two talks, sort of first the basics, right? How do I just work with Docker and be successful as a developer? And then, build images that people can use. And then the other side of that is, okay, so what are we doing with these images, right? How are we launching them? Where are they deployed? What does the topology look like? And why would I care about orchestration?
Would you use Docker if you're not worried about the orchestration itself?
It's possible. So I mean, there's probably a lot of different ways you can think about using Docker or containers in general, but Docker obviously being the main well-known brand around that. And of course, it's a great developer tool. So number one, I use Docker even when I'm not deploying things to containers. And I use it because, we have complex solutions that require backends, databases, caches, and we need a way to run locally and be successful without having to deal with, shared, provisioned cloud assets and who's using which one and where's the state of the data, how do I reinitialize and start new tests, or even just how do I set up my own data for local development. And so, it's really powerful to be able to just take containers that have Redis or Postgres or, Event Store or SQL Server, and the list goes on, and make that a packaged, runtime experience on your machine with Compose Up, and have that without any effort set up your devs for productivity. And now they go to their solution in Visual Studio, let's say, and they run that, and they just hit localhost stuff, and they've got their databases and their caches and all the things. So you can bootstrap scripts, and we do that quite a lot, and it really helps for onboarding new people to a team. It helps for starting fresh when we want to do a new set of tests, and that's not even related to how I'm planning on deploying the actual application assets. So, that's like sort of one point that I like to make about Docker. And then the next thing would be, if I'm developing an app, containerization aspects allow you to encapsulate all your dependencies, make it configuration as code, make it predictable, have an immutable image that results from your build. So, that immutable image can then traverse dev, test, UAT, prod, and just be changing only in the way of maybe environment variable overrides and things like that. So you can benefit from that even in a small startup that has no need for redundancy, let's say. They might not even care to spend more than one machine, in terms of costs. So they just build containers, and it's an easy way to deploy something to the cloud, and it's just a VM with an endpoint. And then, when they need to fix something, they have this immutable image, and they could actually literally even go into the image, edit a thing, fix it right there in situ. I know people that have done that and found it really, really valuable. Or then there's the other side, which is just, hey, I make a change to the code, it builds a new image, the image goes out, and we create a process around that. And that has nothing to do with orchestration. It has to do with, predictable build and deployment procedures with this idea of immutability.
And it's good that it doesn't clutter your dev environment as well.
Yeah.
Because once you have multiple projects in your environment, you start cluttering.
Oh, you're installing all these things on your actual machine,
yeah.
and then you have to wipe it every once in a while and clean up. And yeah, so
if you have a local SQL running, you end up with hundreds of databases in your local environment. And if you have that in a Docker, so you spin up as soon as you don't need it anymore. You shut it off and it's done.
Yeah, and actually you brought up a good point there. You can actually even just use Docker as the development environment. So where do you install the different versions of Visual Studio?
Have you done that?
Using some
Visual Studio
customers
in a
I've
Docker?
worked with have been, interested in that process, so we've done it.
So you've ran.
They just
Visual
use
Studio in a Docker
they run the
container.
container, and you give it a bunch of memory and
That's
resources, and that is your development environment. And it can run as effectively locally as it can maybe on a VM in the cloud. So instead of building VMs,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you found an issue running Visual Studio in a Docker?
No, I mean it all comes down to resources. Yeah. It's virtualization, so yeah.
Cool. So a lot of people use Docker to do microservice and such, and a lot of people use different languages or different technologies for the same project or for the same ecosystem. They have different tools for the right job. Do you find that useful in your area? Like how do you find that?
So in a given company that builds software, very frequently they baseline on one platform or another, right? Like they're .NET or they're Node or they're this. But that is less and less, I guess, or it's more and more common that there's these things that sort of pop in, like, oh, I need to build something for machine learning, let's use Python for that, or Golang is really light and easy to work with for certain types of, applications. Like, this team over here, they really want to learn it, and it's probably looking like an effective way to build this. Let's let that team focus on Golang. Or maybe you bring in people, that are consultants from other companies, and you want their skill because they specialize in maybe data science or machine learning or security or something, and they know how to develop with, Java, JVM, or, like Spring Framework, or they know how to develop with Node, or, the list goes on. So letting them use the tool they know best to build the piece that you need, assuming it can be compartmentalized in a way that it's not going to become messy for you to manage it later. Like if that team's going to be there long term, then let them do what they know best. Let them be productive, right? That's, again, not everybody will find that a useful thing, but it can happen. The other thing that can happen, though, is you have components you want to use in your solution, like generating PDFs or some functionality that's been built by another company. Maybe they sell it as a product, or maybe it's an open source thing, but it's been written in this other language, and you don't need to develop on it. You don't need a team that knows the source per se. You're just going to keep building, maybe take their image or their component, and you want to launch it somewhere and compose it with the rest of the app. But you don't want to now have a separate VM with different things installed. And of course, it could be a problem maybe if your Windows machine, let's say you're deploying Windows apps, has IIS and your .NET applications, and then this other thing that maybe might not play nicely or use too many resources. So using containers is another way to compartmentalize and isolate the dependencies and even the resource usage.
When people talk about container, they often think about microservices, right? Would you use container for a big monolith application? Do you think it's a good use of container?
So think about migration to the cloud. A lift and shift story would be, I take my monoliths and I've got these huge web apps and APIs with tons and tons of technical debt and tons of JavaScript libraries and all the things, right? And not very, I guess the structure internally is maybe a little bit too tightly coupled, and it's hard to tear it apart. But you want to move to a cloud, maybe from an on-prem or something like that. I mean, you could just say, hey, let's set up a cloud VM and deploy it on IIS and call it a day until we're ready to migrate otherwise. And that would be fine. And I would say, you know, your timeline, the knowledge of your team, and your future plans for Docker and containers should weigh into whether you would think about going containers. But let's say that same company has a plan to build some new components and they want to adopt a microservices architecture because there's some business value they've defined, and that's important. So that means that they're maybe going to end up with an orchestration platform. So now we need to deal with like the new stuff we're building and then these old websites, and I don't want to manage VMs over here and orchestration platform for those other assets over here. So let's bring it all into one ecosystem, which means container, 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 and you could do that. Now, interestingly, Service Fabric's approach with, you know, it supports containers too now.
All right.
But before that, you could still actually launch processes in Service Fabric of other guest executables. So it could be that PDF generator, that Java-based thing, that, you know, other possibly legacy app. You know, whether it would lift and shift well, it would depend probably. But it's just another way of thinking that, you know, we're heading towards this idea of I want to manage a bunch of things and they might be different. So.
Yeah, that brings me to the next question about Service Fabric. What's the best use case for Service Fabric and a containerized application or orchestration? What do you think the way to choose one or the other, or if there is any?
Yeah, there's so many things that factor into a platform choice, right? So when we deal with customers that are trying to move into a microservices architecture, so there's this process we go through, right, to get there. And first and foremost, is microservices right for you? Does it fit? Next is, you know, in what way do we want to approach it, right? Are we going full-blown containers and orchestration, or is the solution small enough that maybe we could just deal with VMs and deploy stuff, but think in a microservices way, like start teasing things into separate, decoupled, you know, operational components or websites or apps. And so, you know, we have to go through a process to get to the point where we've really just defined for the business, because it's all about the business, will this benefit you? What are your pain points today? What are the things you can't solve today? And how will making the effort and investment and cost that goes with it to move to microservices and also a platform stack, how will that, you know, help you restructure the way you do things so that you're actually saving money down the road or building new revenue channels, either or, right? So if your business doesn't have a use case that should produce some ROI or monetary or other benefit to the company, then you will very quickly find that companies will halt in their tracks because it's expensive to migrate applications in the first place. It's even more expensive because of the time and the resources involved to think in a microservices way and do that well, and you will have to iterate and refactor. And then it's even more expensive when you start looking at, you know, the container platforms required to host these things. So, you know, because you've got a lot of nodes, you're talking about a lot of VMs, and you have to see that this is going to benefit me somehow. Because if the business says, that costs way too much, why on earth did we do that? Then they're just going to drop the project and you wasted everybody's time.
Because it's not cheap. Like, it's not cheap.
So I really try to make sure that I see that value before even endeavoring down a path of platform choices. But once we've decided, yeah, this is a good fit for you, and then you start thinking about what does your development team do today? How do they operate today? What does the solution look like? what kind of tools do we need to manage it? So if I have a solution that is going to be all cloud, then we can look at, say everything leveraging assets in Azure. And if I need an on-prem hybrid, now I need to think about something interesting, which is I don't want to manage things in two different ways. I want it to feel the same when I manage it on-prem and in the cloud, and feel like I have a single pane into that, which means I need the platform hosting experience and deployment and DevOps procedures to feel the same. So I'm going to look for ways to do that. So we've had customers that use like, Kubernetes that way, or DCOS, which is the Mesosphere product, both container platforms. And Service Fabric, of course, now with Azure Stack, or even just Service Fabric proper, can be used in the same way. And so it's becoming more and more common, right, that people kind of need both, right? Some things have to stay on-prem for whatever reason.
So when to choose Service Fabric, and when would you go for container services? Right,
so now we've gotten to the point where, let's say we've decided I'm ready to adopt a platform and put my eggs in one basket. If I'm, a native Visual Studio developer, I'm probably more open to choosing Service Fabric because it fits with everything I know and love. I mean, what's nice about Service Fabric is the programming model is really familiar and easy to work with. I mean, you're defining these, types that represent your stateful services, for example, like actors, or even just stateful types, or you've got reliable queues and collections. So the way to go about developing those is just so natural for a .NET developer that there's some productivity value add there. But the other value add is that they handle all the state management for you across the cluster. And so literally out of the box, I mean, I could rebuild a product for a startup, let's say, where it's early days and we don't know yet about, my back-end data aggregation and all the things I might need to report on. But what I do know is I need to get up and running. I need a platform to run it. I want it to be productive. So I've got tools, Visual Studio, .NET development, very friendly. And I can, leverage this like automatic state management that comes with Service Fabric, for example. So that's a really compelling story, I think. And as the tooling has come along and improved, it's more compelling than, say, it was 2 years ago, right? Like now, today, it's becoming a much stronger contender, in my view, to be a choice between container platform or Service Fabric, which can also host containers, but it's really more of a holistic look at the platform with also the state management side, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
So when you go to container services, you can choose between a lot of orchestration tools, as Kubernetes, Docker Swarm.
Right.
Do you have any preference on them, or is there any orchestration tool that you have to choose for different kind of jobs you're going to do?
So I like that you asked if I have a preference, because, for the past 2 years, like my company, Alliance, I've been building a microservices practice with a lot of people involved that, specialize in A or B platforms. So, I mean, I've been really lucky to work with like people that have tons of experience in, in general Azure, automation, because that's going to help you be successful there, or even Amazon and EC2 container services, or Google App Engine. So as much as I might have an affinity, let's say, to the Microsoft Cloud for lots of reasons, because I like the PaaS story, and that's actually probably where most of my direct work comes. I've enjoyed the fact that we've been able to work on projects that cover all the platforms and providers, because I kind of feel like, there's affinities that sometimes customers have that lead them to a path, and you want to be able to support all of them. Right? Yeah, I'm not going to say everybody has to be in one platform or another. And likewise, when we look at the orchestration engines, they they have different features, like, you know, that might make you choose one or another. But the truth is, it's somewhat subtle, and they all kind of do a little bit of this, where they eventually catch up with each other. So it's really hard to say, oh, this one's the best one for everybody, because, you know, I hate the fact that the answer is always it depends, but you know, it kind of is,
but it
right?
is, yeah.
It does. So you know, I've had good experiences with the Docker, DCOS, right? So you know, we've had some really great experiences with customers on that. Some of them were just cloud-based, some of them were on-prem and cloud. But it's a great platform. You know, Marathon has 10 years of you know, history in its scheduler, right? And it's reliable and stable, and people like it. And they've got an open source track for people that don't want to spend the big bucks, and then they've got the paid sort of, I'm an enterprise, I need to know things are secured and locked down, I need support, and you know, that's when you get into the paid products. So, and you know, likewise, Kubernetes is really well supported in the sense that Google's behind it, and there's a huge community. So while they don't have a paid product, it's always going to be open source, probably, right?
It's the first one that people think about when you talk about orchestration.
And that's true, right? Yeah, it's I mean, it's very popularized right now, and of course, it's different than Mesosphere, right? When I looked at the two, Mesosphere has an easier management UI. I like the way they package things. I like that you can run things on bare metal and do data workloads on it without having it to be containerized and still be scheduled. But you know, as things evolve, you know, for all I know, Kubernetes already supports that, and I, you know, can't keep up with all of them in every sense of detail. So you got to be careful not to position that you can't do this. Maybe they can, but in a different way.
But you don't know, yeah.
And then there's Docker Enterprise Edition, right? So of course that's a bit newer compared to the other orchestration platforms, but remember, this is like backed by Docker. And you know,
as Docker Swarm.
Exactly, and Docker Swarm's been around, obviously, it's been evolving quickly and rapidly over the past years, right? And it's, you know, maybe newer to the game, but they are putting support behind it and security features behind it, and you know, it's going to obviously work very nicely with the things we already know and love about Compose and Swarm and working with Docker natively. So I think, you know, if you're going to go into a paid product, then it would be silly not to look at the one that comes from the company behind the containers, right? Definitely. So we've actually deployed that a year ago in Amazon for one customer, and it was early days, but it had the fundamentals that I needed. But now it's, you know, come full circle with a lot more features, a lot better UI and integration. So I think it's actually, you know, now a contender, right? So now it's an actual contender. I would have to think about that. So, you know, Kubernetes, and then all of these can be deployed in Azure, for example, right? With like a click of a button with a template. It's still a bunch of virtual machines. Ultimately, you own them and you have to manage them. And that's a thing that, you know, people shouldn't overlook, because you're still doing IaaS. Just like you are with Service Fabric, right? Because you have to care for the machines and what's been deployed to them.
Have you had cases where the customer wants some VMs hosted in Azure and some in Amazon or Google Cloud Services, and you are orchestrating all the VMs?
Not with orchestration cross provider, but in general, people sometimes do like a disaster recovery plan that goes cross cloud. That's typically a very large organization desire, and you know, because it's costly. And typically you can have disaster recovery plans and still baseline on a single cloud provider. So
because you're talking about having containers in the cloud and on premises.
That's right.
In what scenario that fits?
Well, so on-prem and cloud usually has to do with there are workloads that the customer is not comfortable putting in the cloud for, you know, for reasons of trust. And
so it's not about load balancing the same container in the cloud and on premises.
Not
just
at all.
a separate container altogether.
It's usually there are things that run on-prem, and then there's things that run in cloud, and they're typically different parts of the application. Maybe it's a migration story because we're on-prem right now. We're going to start putting assets in the cloud, but we're going to get comfortable with that first and start with certain things, and then eventually add more, and then maybe eventually we won't have both. But there are some companies that feel very strongly that they need to manage certain things in their data center, and I mean that's there's always going to be those people. Yeah, it's not wrong. I mean, I think it costs you more in the long run when you do that, but again, what if they've already got an investment of all kinds of equipment,
if
right?
they have the whole equipment,
yeah,
why not
exactly,
use it?
all that hardware, and I mean, they're not going to just throw it away. So, yeah.
And what are the pain points that you found during the work you did in the past of running orchestration? What do you think the pain point? What are the pain points that you had?
There's a lot of pain points.
A lot of
Well, because it's hard.
What are the main
it's hard.
top 3 pain points?
It's
that you
hard
had?
work, right? I mean, you're essentially changing your approach completely.
It's a different mindset
to how
isn't
you
it?
manage and deploy applications. And at the farthest extreme, you're now getting used to many little things running around instead of several monolithic big things that are deployed in a very precise manner, right? Like where we have a load balancer in front of N servers, but we're not dealing with dynamic discovery of ports and things like that. We're not leveraging server density, which is something that containers can allow you to do, right? You can, have spare density on your cluster of machines and then run a job, and the job will spin up containers that do stuff and finish processing as there's space, and then they stop and free up that space. So you're like, that's one of the benefits, right, of like having an orchestration platform is that you can leverage that type of workload, if you will, to to deploy and use every ounce of space you have or resources that you have available to you, rather than having a whole bunch of other machines that you set up just to run those jobs separately, right? Just use the space as it's available, right? Classic grid, it's not grid computing, but it's got sort of flavors of that, right? And that's just one thing. But I mean, where did you come from first for the question? I'm trying to remember where we started there. We're on a thread here. Yeah.
The pain points about
like the pain points, right?
About orchestration.
Right. See, I already forgot the pain. There you go. But the pain is in getting there. It's in.
It's a long journey, isn't it?
Even just design, right? Like, who's qualified to help you design a microservices solution, right? And the answer is you need your business domain people, you need the people that know the current, if there is a current application, and kind of how it works, and you need to take the problems of that application with you to the table and start discussing and looking for, what's the right way to solve those problems, right? Part of that being maybe breaking up the domains so that business owners can make decisions and ship features that don't touch this other area over here. So now we've got more agility. But it's a finessing that takes, experience and practice and iteration and knowledge of all those parties, plus maybe somebody who understands the end result where you're going to from a development and solution design perspective, but also from a DevOps deployment and management perspective. So there's a lot of brains in that that need to come together to complete a microservices design.
And once you have your microservices services in place, so you design your solution, you know how it's going to fit together.
You think
what fair enough. What are the technical pain points? So once you have the whole solution design in your mind, you have the services, you know how you're going to load balancing and stuff like that. You know which service needs more resource and things like that. Once you get to the deployment stage.
Well, I think you're actually talking about two things, right? One is do I understand the application design and how I need to break up the solution into these potentially separately hosted components that could live in containers, right? What APIs do I have? What web front ends do I have? What, back-end processing, components do I have that might maybe process queues and do things, jobs that run on a schedule? Like, what are all of those like moving parts are part of the design phase? And really at that point, not even talking about how will I orchestrate it, how many resources do I need, how many servers do I need, and how do I make that DevOps story sing, right? So I would say both of those things are hard, but I think the harder part is the design, because the design is that finessing, that iteration, and also decisions have to be made about things like, do I need a message-driven architecture? Will that benefit our solution? So maybe to give an example, like I think on a couple of recent, let's say, years of design, because I've been doing design for a long time, but architecture design in the days when we just had, a couple technologies involved was much different, right? It was just SOAP and services and SOA, and there was these services, and then there's these front ends, and
so much easier.
We were sort of heading in the direction of compartmentalization of things, but it was done and designed with developer mind. So it was like, oh yeah, this API is security. Let's have a security API. And over here we have orders. Let's have an orders API. And let's have a customers API. And, it didn't really think about the actual business domain, because maybe security has 4 facets. We've got permissions, and that happens over here. And then we got runtime login and audit that happens over here. And, if I should be able to add audit features that have nothing to do with permissions, so why would those be one service? Why would those have a single unit of deployment? They should be decoupled so that you can have a business owner around permission and authorization own that and have a faster life cycle of deploying features. So I'm using security as an example because it's something people maybe all understand, because otherwise I'm fictitiously, talking about customers and orders and, whatever, So, but you get the idea, right? Like, you have to look at your solution and say, well, again, pain points drive it, right? Use cases, like we have trouble with this. I never know why that order didn't get into the database. And now I have developers looking at data and results from jobs that process to figure it out, because that's the best use of my developer's time. Probably not, right? And so we need to solve that problem. How do you solve it? Visibility. How do you solve it? How do you get visibility? Logs, audits, events. Okay, do we want a message-based architecture? Will that actually, if we have so many different systems that kind of commingle into potential workflows, maybe we need messages, right? Because the messages can now be the source of truth. And under this domain and this workflow, the messages can touch any number of 10 or 20 components. But if we have activity tracing, we could touch one message and go, what was that activity?
So you can follow
and then I can go flip that into a dashboard, and I can see it came from this web app, and it called this API, and this, wrote a message to a queue, and then that queue picked it up, and it has one activity ID all the way through. So now I can view that in like some sort of Elasticsearch or equivalent, dashboarding tool, maybe a custom tool if necessary, right? But you shouldn't have to. And now I've got visibility, and can I put maybe some sort of, process manager or workflow manager in front of that, so that we actually kind of know the state of the whole workflow by looking at all those messages, you see? And so it starts to get interesting. But you can already hear that would be work, right? Hell of a lot of fun to design and implement. And there are reusable pieces to that, like assets that, over time we've built, for example, like that are just sort of, the theme behind it is repeatable, but it's got to be tailored to the solution, right? And you can make, you invest in that for the first, let's say, proof of concept or release for your microservice architecture. And then you get to reuse that everywhere, because you've now proven I can do this. I've got dashboards. I understand how it works. I've got component components I can plug into every service we build from here on in, and we'll just tailor it to that use case. So I don't know. I mean, I'm going on and on because there's so much to talk about, but you know, it's all experiences that happen, and you know, every experience is going to be slightly different, but that's the way I'm looking at it. You know, and then of course we then go with our team and figure out, like, based on the platform, who's the right person to work on what, right? And I mean, is this going to be DCOS or Kubernetes or Service Fabric, or you know?
Have you find anyone against going to containers and the whole microservice architecture in your journey?
Oh yeah, especially consultants.
Yeah.
Some of my really good friends that are consultants are like,
nope,
it's
not
a
going.
bunch of hooey, I'm not going there. But that's okay, you know? I mean, it's
not
hard.
the answer for everything.
No, honestly, like, as much as I'm excited about it, and as much as I enjoy the process of doing the work around design and helping customers implement on these platforms, you know, as much as that's exciting, honestly, I don't take it very lightly. Like, I don't go in saying, you know, microservices is your solution for everything, because I don't want to be the one that made that recommendation. They need to be the one that see the value in that and the business case for it, and that the cost and the effort for the first 8 months is going to be lots of cost, lots of time, lots of effort to perfect this whole story I'm telling you around visibility into what's happening, disaster recovery, knowing when services fail, they'll heal, practicing all of those things with drills. These are time-consuming activities, getting your logs and diagnostics in place, but they're good things to get done. You get that done with like 10 or probably even only a few services in your first 8 months to a year, honestly. But then now you've got it, and now, so now when we need to onboard some new services, we know what we're doing. Cool. We've perfected it on a smaller first launch, and we can reuse all that stuff and repurpose our knowledge, you know? So you have to be careful, though, not to go there unless there's the investment of that 8 months. Think about how much money that could cost a company. They have to need it and want it. Cool.
I think that's it from me. Do you have any new exciting things you're doing that you want to talk about? Any new stuff coming?
Well, I think it's honestly quite a job just to keep up with all the platforms, and you know, no one person can know all of them, right? That's why I emphasize that I work with people that know more than me on lots of things, right? Like, you know, I know certain things, they know certain things, and I've built a nice team of great people I respect who are awesome to work with. And so the thing that's fun and challenging is just keeping up with all the platforms, because I need to make sure we're, you know, keeping up with that before the customer comes and needs it, so that we're ready to go. And we really try to keep up with all of them. So we're always busy, you know, using it internally for projects in order to make sure that we're kind of able to help people make choices, because that's, to me, the hardest part is, you know, if I only know Kubernetes, or if I only know Service Fabric, I'm going to recommend that all the time. And I want to...
It's not always the right tool.
Yeah. So I like to think of us, you know, as, because we have these experts across different things, let's be neutral enough to respect the fact that sometimes there's a different tool for each that might be more appropriate. So yeah, we work hard on that, and it's fun, and you know, it keeps us really super busy, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, Michele, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for
spending the time with us.
Yeah.
I'm Thiago Passos for SSW TV. Thank you very much.